am Allan to be your host. I am a pastor, retired, professor, Bible moth, theologian in exile, and peddler of hope, and I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture at Faith Seeking Understanding University, a completely fabricated institution of higher learning, but where all seekers are invited to ponder profound things. And I have with me my colleague as a member of the distinguished member of the faculty at FSUU, Michael Cruz, who is the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology at Faith Seeking Understanding. Well, Michael, it's been an interesting few months because we've had trouble being regular on the air, but here we are.
We're back. We're back. Persistence pays off.
Right. Yeah. So a little sports. So your Royals are owning my Guardians of late.
Yeah, and, 3 of 4. So this
3 of 4. I went to one of those games this week, and I can't think the last time I was at the stadium when the Guardians won, so I'm getting a little paranoid. I'm not a superstitious guy by any means, but
right.
After a while it begins to affect you. Okay.
Right.
So maybe a problem, but I don't think that's it. Their pitching is really banged up. They're starting pitching.
It is.
Yeah. But some people are saying that they were not predicted to play as well as they have.
Right.
So some are suggesting that they finally reached down to the level they should be. So right. I don't know, because they're since the end of June or whatever it is. I mean, they're like a 500 ball club.
Right.
So it's interesting. I don't know, but I still have hopes that in the off season we'll be having some baseball in Cleveland. But your Royals, boy, they really were hitting up a storm the other night.
They were. They only won 56 games all of last season. If they continue, if they have the winning percentage now at the end of the season that they have now, it will be the biggest turnaround of one team to the next since 1903. So, I mean, we're talking historic proportions in terms of change. If they won the pennant, no team has ever lost 100 games and then won the pennant the next year. So that would be a pretty remarkable come around. We'll see. Yeah, I did hear that the Indians had to use a lot of relief pitching earlier in the year, and one of the concerns was that their bullpen was wearing out. And
I think that's what we're seeing. And so that's a problem. And the problem is, as you know, you need pitching to get there. So
exciting season.
Yeah, we'll see. So football is coming.
Yeah.
And, your Chiefs are expected to make a run for it.
Yeah.
For the Super Bowl again this year.
Yeah. Mahomes made the 53-man cut. So we're pleased about that.
He did. When I posted that on social media, I cracked up when I saw that, right? he made it.
He made it. Yay.
Fans are breathing a sigh of relief. Yeah. Well, the Browns with he who shall not be named, I don't know. I mean, the quarterback, he still seems to have some issues. Whether there's more going on or not, I don't know. But it's just interesting. I read this morning briefly in a headline that Browns have restructured his contract. I think that they're making more of what they're paying him as bonus, so it's incentive. So we'll see. We'll see. They're getting Nick Chubb back. So
that'll help.
Yeah.
Kansas City, we've got the Royals and possibly in the playoffs. Looks like they'll be there. Chiefs going for a three-peat. All 3 of the regional universities are ranked in the top 25 for football. It's going to be a busy sports season where we are here.
And you have got great barbecue. What more can you want?
I tell you, man, we're in hog heaven here.
It's like heaven on earth.
That's right.
Is this heaven? No, it's Kansas City.
That's right.
turn a phrase on a movie. Yeah. All right. Well, we need to get down to business, Michael.
Yeah.
So today, on to more serious things. Democracy, is it in trouble?
Yeah.
We certainly want to spend probably most of our time talking about what's going on in the United States, but wanted to begin with this little comment from Michael Frost, who is a missiologist. He's Australian,
right?
And here's what he said in a post. More than 100 countries will hold or have held elections in 2024. Nearly half of the global population will vote this year, including 8 of the world's 10 most populous nations: Bangladesh, Brazil, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Pakistan. He includes Russia in there, although we know how that election will
Right.
go.
Right.
Russia and the United States. And then he says it's not all about America, which is true.
Right.
We
Right.
Americans tend to think it's all about us. But it is quite an interesting thought in these times to think that how many democratic nations are actually going to have elections this year. And in some of those nations, just as in the United States, there seems to be some authoritarian proclivities.
Right.
So let's begin with the overall question, and then let's drill down. Michael, do you think democracy is in trouble?
My personal take on this is that there is a sense in which democracy is always in trouble. There's nothing natural or nothing. It's not the default mode by which we operate, and you have to work for it. You have to preserve it, and the whole. What do I want to say? You can talk about, is it a bug or is it a feature? I think it's a feature that democracy is somewhat vulnerable, because you do make the opportunity in democracy for voices on the edges to be able to have a voice. But the idea is that when those voices on the edge have their voice, that's what promotes the people that are still want democracy to activate and preserve that democracy. So I don't think the fact that there are occasionally challenges to democratic systems means that means democracy is weak. I'm not going to go that far just yet. I think we are seeing for our lifetime, some unprecedented challenges to democracy, and I think that is true. You talked about internationally. One of the countries I was following some recently was Bangladesh, who just recently ousted the children there have been I think it's the daughter who was the prime minister there. They've ousted that person, and Mohammed Yunus, banker to the poor, is serving as the interim government leader in Bangladesh. And that is a pro-democracy movement in a country of 171 million people. And I think, yes, you see some authoritarian influences rising, but that tends to activate the democratic entities as well. And so what we will find, what we will find is who's stronger. And that's always been the case. We've always had those challenges.
Yeah, I like your point about democracy is always kind of in a crisis in a sense, because I think the one truism of the past couple hundred years, particularly the last century maybe, is that in democratic societies, people want them. Well, I'm not. There's a certain percentage of people,
right,
in democracies who like it until it's not working for them.
Right.
And then they want somebody to come in who's got a strong hand to make things the way they believe they should be.
Right.
Because part of the truths of democratic government is in elections is you don't get your way all the time. And,
that's right.
And that you are disappointed and you accept it. But
right.
But and I still want to say, I want to go back to the 2000 election, Gore and Bush, when Florida was, of course, the focus of everybody's attention. The Supreme Court made the ruling that they did, which effectively meant that George Bush was the winner. And I remember Al Gore's speech. I remember him coming out there with his VP candidate, Lieberman, and other people in his campaign, and basically saying that he vehemently disagreed with the Supreme Court's decision, but that he would respect it.
Right.
And that to me was an example of democracy at work, right? And the peaceful transfer of power at work.
Right.
I don't think that's happening today.
No, it sure is not.
And that even after 60 court cases that told somebody you didn't win,
right?
he continues to say that he did and denies it. But um, it is so. So again, the point simply is. Let me say one other thing, and then I turn it over to you. There's a little bit of hubris here, a little bit of pride,
Mm-hmm.
when I think that my politics is so right and just that it ought to be imposed on everybody, and that
Right.
even the people on whom it's imposed will, once it's imposed, they'll like it. They'll
Right.
see that
Yeah.
it's right.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm hearing. And by the way, I hear it from people on the extreme left too.
Yeah.
Okay. The
Right.
difference is, as I keep saying, the extreme right is the one that has the power and influence at the moment. They're the
Right.
ones that actually win elections.
Right.
Whereas the people on the extreme left, they can talk all they want, but
Yeah.
right now they have no chance.
Right.
But it's just as if our how we see this is so right that it's okay. It's okay if it gets imposed because, everyone will come to see the truth. Okay, let me stop there.
That's fine. Yeah, I think the lesson learned over centuries of trying to form these nations is the balance between, you can have power that's too centralized, you can have power that's too decentralized, and the trick is to find that median in the middle that balances those two concerns. Every society is going to have a spectrum of people on any particular set of issues as to how things should be done, and there's going to be disagreement across. No matter what the vote is, there's still going to be disagreement about how things should be done. The solution to that is that no decision is ever finally decided, that there is always the opportunity for somebody else to continue to make the case for the alternative and to build a coalition of people to be able to then go with the decision that they would like to see made. That's what keeps society peaceful. That's what keeps it stable. That's what keeps it prosperous, is the ability to be able to come back another day, to gracefully lose and come back another day, and then try to inch things back your direction. That's democracy. And what you have now is you have in the Republican Party, you have people who basically abandoned that vision. Their intention is to impose I'm not saying everybody in the Republican Party, but the ones that are dominating the scene right now. That is the vision here. Somebody recently, operative in Trump's campaign, was basically saying that if he doesn't get all the electoral votes that he's supposed to have on November 5th, this election isn't over. It'll be decided at inauguration. Was the basic point. So they have no intention of recognizing, and they're already laying the groundwork for why the election is corrupt.
Yeah. Trump said in an interview the other day that he'd have won California.
Yeah,
Jesus had counted the votes, and that he made this crazy claim that Californians, I guess Democratic Californians, were each given 7 ballots and all this nonsense.
Yeah, right.
And one of the things for me, Michael, is why that's not a game changer for Trump supporters is beyond me. If I had a candidate I was supporting and he or she started talking like that, it would be, the
right.
end. But it's the way it is. But you're right on that. And the other thing along with that is that every society has liberal and conservative components.
Right.
Right? It's endemic.
Right.
To the way things work.
Right.
And so my thesis that I've been pushing on social media and in other places, because I've been thinking about this the last few years. My thesis is that conservatism and liberalism is endemic to any society, and society is most vital when you have a healthy liberalism and a healthy conservatism. Vital, right?
Exactly. Right.
When people come to believe, and when you do that, by the way, the enemy is authoritarianism. The enemy would squelch that.
Right.
But when you get people who believe, let's do on the left, when you get people on the left who believe it's conservatism itself that's the enemy,
right,
or you get conservatives who believe that liberalism itself is the enemy. I have a Facebook friend, she's pretty conservative, and she likes to say this: liberals ruin everything, right?
Yeah.
So once you believe that the libs are the ones to be defeated, you
Right.
will entertain authoritarianism if it
Right.
gives you what you want.
Right.
And the same is true on the left.
Right.
You know, we can't say that 30 years from now we won't have problems with a left-wing authoritarian
Right.
who's talking the same way Trump is, and that there will
Exactly.
be people on the left who, because they believe conservatism is the enemy, they're
Right.
going to support that person because they need to have their agenda implemented. So
Right.
once you think it's one of these endemic sides that is the enemy, I mean, try to think for a minute. What would a purely conservative society look like, or what would
Yeah.
a purely liberal society look like?
Right.
There's no
Yeah.
way to have that. So my thesis is that what's happening is the reason is a lot of people are giving the authoritarianism of Trump a pass is because they believe liberalism is the enemy.
Right.
Right. I have friends who will point to little things that the Democratic Party has done and say, "Oh yeah, but it's the Republicans who are authoritarians." Like, you know.
Right.
And so that's my thesis.
Yeah. I mean, I fully agree. I think the idea is that you begin to think in absolutist terms, that ignores the spectrum of people that exist in society, and that there is that tension between liberal and conservative is what often leads to a healthy society. In my estimation, it's that back and forth, because we are, no matter what our ideology, our perspective, there are probably some good, admirable things in the visions that we have. There are usually blind spots and fallacies in the positions that each side holds, or multiple sides hold, and it's that dynamic tension that leads to a messy consensus as to how to move forward for a time at that time, and then you continually reevaluate through elections, and you pivot and move different directions based on who can develop the greater consensus. Once you've abandoned that, and this is the other thing that the flip side, or not the flip side, but the additional piece to it, that once you have an authoritarian who's going to grant what your side wants, what's the guarantee that that authoritarian stays on the side of the things that you want? And when they start moving to do other things that you don't like, now you have no recourse in which to challenge that person that you put in power. And that's the dangerous side of it. What was, I don't know who originally said it. It was Paul Harvey or whoever it was, when he said, any government big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you have. Well, to some degree, that's true with authoritarians. Any authoritarian who can give you everything you want in society is also big enough to take away everything that you want in society. And so the idea of democracy is the thing that we have come to that creates that balance to keep that extremism from taking root. Yeah.
Yeah, and it isn't that what we're talking about doesn't suggest, we're not suggesting that mainstream liberalism nor mainstream conservatism doesn't deserve critique.
Absolutely.
Because they do.
Yeah.
But what I think we're both saying is we're dealing with a different kind of approach to how things get done. That in a democracy, liberalizing and conservatizing, is that a word?
Yeah.
Elements are endemic to the process.
Right.
And by the way, I think embedded in the notion of democracy is the idea that people on the other side of the aisle, whom we may disagree with, nevertheless have some good points to make.
Right.
And they're not always wrong. And so we need to entertain that. This is different.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism, this is different. And this is what you and I are saying. That's why I continue to say that Trumpism is not conservative.
No, it isn't.
Trumpism is right wing.
Right.
But it's not conservative.
Right.
Which is why you have conservatives who have conservative creds,
right,
such as Liz Cheney,
right,
and also George Will, the commentator who left the Republican Party over Trump.
Right.
That they do not have, that Trumpism is not a conservative the kind of conservatism
Right.
that I think a society, healthy conservatism, the society needs. So
Right.
I'm always, people accuse me of being a liberal. Maybe in some ways I am.
Yeah.
But I've always said my problem with Trumpism has never been that he's conservative. He's not. That's
Exactly.
my problem.
Right. Yeah.
That's my problem. I wish Liz Cheney was a nominee for president.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I wish Mitt Romney were a nominee again. I mean,
Right.
John McCain, God rest his soul, if he were still around.
Yeah.
This is the kind of vital conservatism
Right.
that our society needs that at the moment doesn't have. Again, not to say there aren't those folks, they just don't have any platform,
Right.
and anybody who speaks out against Trump gets ousted. And that's the other thing about authoritarianism.
Right.
When you think about the fact that Liz Cheney in Congress voted with Trump, I don't know what it was, 90-some% of the time.
Right.
And yet she's ousted from the Republican Party because she had the audacity to question,
Right.
To say it in a snarky way.
Right.
She had the audacity to question the leader, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And now she's out.
Yeah. Well, and just backing up from a higher view, the 50,000-foot view, looking at what's going on, and you began this by saying that we need to look what's happening with elections that are happening around the world. And I've mentioned this before, but I just reiterate this here since nobody's going to know that past background from other videos we've talked about. Sociologist Anthony Giddens wrote a book back in the 90s, actually, called Runaway World. And the basic thesis of his book was that you have globalization happening, that the world is shrinking, that people are no longer as isolated as they once were, both in terms of information and in terms of travel. People interact with each other more more frequently and more intensely than they ever have from all different cultures across the world. Leads to two different things. And one of the things he talks about is that economically, the world is becoming more homogenous, that the world economy has become more integrated. And so things are more interdependent, and economies tend to work in very similar ways wherever you are in the world. So that has become more homogenous. The flip side of that, however, is that with the increase in contact, the proliferation of information, the destruction of gatekeepers who can control information, is that you have information flowing every direction, every which way. People that were long silenced now have the ability to make their voices heard. They have the ability to find other people who share their views, to be able to form a community with each other, to press for their causes. And so now we are hearing about issues and perspectives that challenge ours, that many have never heard before. They've always been there, but have never heard before because people didn't have the ability to give their voice to what was going on. And so what then that ends up doing is that wherever you are in the world, is that begins to pose a threat to whatever the traditional culture is of that world, because you have these outside influences. And you can talk about whether that's United States, whether that's Russia, whether that's Saudi Arabia, wherever it is, whatever has been sort of the norm for the culture, everybody's culture is being challenged because the world has shrunk and now people have access to other ideas about how to do things. That is a tremendous threat for people in every culture. As you and I talked about, there are conservative and liberal types in every culture. For those that are on the conservative wing in their culture, that is a tremendous threat. And that's what I think is giving rise to these conservative authoritarian movements, as they see what seems like a snowballing disaster moving away from them that they can't control, and they are attempting to seize back control of society, of the world that they once knew, and trying to preserve that. And so what Giddens basically argues is that in this 21st century, we talked about liberal versus conservative in terms of policies of, sort of free markets versus sort of social democratic issues. In this century, the issue is globalization versus nationalism. And I really think that that's where the impact of that is. What we are experiencing in the United States is the United States specific version of that dynamic that I think is also playing out everywhere else in the world. So I think that's for the rest of our lifetimes, and possibly for the rest of the century, I think that's going to be the tussle that we're struggling with.
I think that's a great way to put it. Globalization versus nationalism. The other thing that comes along with that, by the way, is the current number of displaced people in the world, refugees. The greatest number since the Second World War, after the Second World War.
Right.
And it's not just the United States. It's in Europe. It's other places. And when your nation, when all of a sudden the demographics start to change, again, that's a threat to the way things have been.
Right.
And so it is not an accident.
Right.
The issue of immigration is front and center on the radar.
Right.
Because it represents part of that tidal wave of change.
Right.
That some people want to resist.
Yeah.
Right?
Demography is definitely one of the big features in all this, and the declining population in the West, in the countries that became the wealthiest the first, in the United States, Europe, those countries, even you could even include Japan, some of those other countries. The population is imploding. The children aren't being born. Meanwhile, in other places around the world that are up and coming but are still relatively poor, that's where you still have population growth, and eventually that population gets bigger and bigger. They become the center of attention in the world, as opposed to those who previously had the power and the wealth. So the world is changing, and I think it's, what was it? Phyllis Tickle talked about the idea that every 500 years we sort of go through this thing where we sort of clean out everything in the church, and we start over again to or at least throw out the things that no longer work and try to preserve things and create something new. And from a theological standpoint, but I think from even just a larger standpoint, that we could be in something as transformative as the period of the Reformation in Europe 500 years ago. I mean, I
well,
think
and in fact, there's biblical precedence for this. It's called exile.
Right. Yeah.
The church goes into exile, or the people of Israel are going to exile, and you basically, in a sense, have a house cleaning. Right. And then what returns is a remnant. Yes. And I do think that, and I sort of, as a pastor for 38 years, I sort of have a tension within myself on this, because I want to see people in church. I want to see people active. I want to see people practicing their faith. But the other reality is that, maybe the best thing to happen for the church is for people who are on the fringe, have always been on the fringe, who've always been very tangentially connected,
right,
to finally make that break, because it's really not, to be honest, it's not of interest then,
right.
And I'm going to get some email on that one. But I just think that the remnant theme is there in the Old Testament, and even Jesus becomes the remnant out of Israel himself. So to go back to Phyllis Tickle's point about every 500 years, I mean, I think she's right on. And of course, if the last time this happened was the Protestant Reformation, then we're due for it, right?
Right, yeah.
Happen again. So you're right. We may. The other issue is, let's continue to talk about that, with the future of the church is in the global South.
Yes.
It's very clear.
Right.
South America and Africa. What's happening with the church in Africa? I've been there.
Yeah.
What's happening in the Church of Africa is just amazing to me.
Yeah.
I was in Cameroon back in May, and the United Methodist Church there is very small. And they don't have more than 14, 15 congregations total. But within the last 2 years, they've started 7 new ones.
Yeah, yeah.
So just think about the percentage of that, right?
Yeah, right.
So if the church in America wants to bring some vitality in, then we ought to welcome immigrants who are believers, because they are the most faithful, active people in the culture. Right. Right?
Right.
And I told, I have a friend, I'm not going to mention his name, told his father-in-law this one time, who tends to be, let's just say, racially insensitive. I'll be kind.
Okay. Yes.
Told him that the church, if it wanted, he was bemoaning the decline of the church, and said, well, if the church wants to be vital, They need to be welcoming these immigrants because they're the most faithful when it comes to the faith.
Right.
And this guy just looked at him and said, I just find that to be real sad.
Yeah.
Right? as if he wants the white church, right?
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not so sure, Michael, that that's not part of the problem that's playing out in the church right now over the division of politics and the things that are happening.
Well, and I would say that effectively, much of the American church, and this goes for liberal and conservative, Jesus is more a mascot for particular ideologies than Jesus is Lord and Savior. And I think that that's where the American church is, and that's the reason it is so weak and impotent in terms of influencing anything. And this is not new. This has been going on all my life. So, yeah.
And in fact, again, to just say this point needs to be made. The focus is on conservatism right now because, again, the conservatives have the political clout to make a difference. That's why Christian nationalism on the right is being critiqued so heavily.
Right.
But as I said to a mainline friend of mine not that long ago, we mainliners got our own versions of this.
Yes, we sure do. Yep.
It's just that nobody's listening.
Right. Yeah. That's the issue. Right. Yes. Right.
I say this is a hasty overgeneralization, but I think it works in some sense.
Yeah.
I'd say that in America, conservative churches are driving people away, and in liberal churches, we're just boring them
to death.
And so, I mean, the people that are driving them away, they're getting the attention because that's the drama. We're just everybody on the mainline end is just falling asleep and doing something else. You know, when you're, I think it was Martin Marty, the church historian, who was no conservative.
Right.
He's got to be in his 90s. I think he's still around, but I remember him saying years and years ago that the problem with liberal Christianity is that it didn't present an alternative reason why people should go to church on Sunday instead of the beach.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think that critique still stands.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So yeah. So the other thing I wanted to say quickly about the democracy thing around the world is I've had friends of mine from other countries say, and I've heard this said, is that Americans, they say to me, Americans, you don't realize how your elections affect the rest of the world.
Right.
Because America, let's face it, America is a powerhouse. I mean, even China, we compete with China. In many ways, they're not close to us, you know.
Right.
In reference to economic clout and all that, we're clearly at the top of this. Russia.
Right.
Putin wants to bring back the glory days of Russia, but they're not coming back anytime soon. So the point simply is that is it? I know there would be a lot of Americans who would react negatively to this comment, but I'm going to say it and then you respond. I think as a voter, when I go to the polls, yes, I want to vote for the person who I think is going to be the best option for America. But I want to vote for somebody who's going to be a good option for the world because we are so global now. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. I think that the idea of isolationism is a fantasy. The idea that you can exist as a nation and just cut yourself off from the rest of the world and let them be their own thing while you go to yours, it's impossible. That's not going to happen. And so the idea, and it's I know it's kind of novel to some people, but the idea that my neighbor doing well contributes to my doing well, and that I think that when the world does well, the United States does well too. So there needs to be that sort of perspective, and I think in terms of who we cast our votes for. Yeah.
And we're not saying that. I mean, there's always decisions that are made that not everybody benefits from when the reality of it. But I agree with you. I think that when our neighbors prosper, we prosper. I think when I was I can remember, I want to say it was, maybe it was Barack Obama's first election, 2008, when he won, and I didn't vote for him.
Yeah.
In 2008, I voted, was it McCain or Romney? I don't remember which one.
McCain. Mm-hmm.
But, McCain. I voted for McCain. And, but, you know, I wanted President Obama to succeed, even though I didn't vote for him.
Right.
And I want to say when Mitch McConnell came out right after that and said his job wasn't to help him succeed, that really bothered me.
Right.
Because that's not what this is about.
Right.
If he succeeds, and I might add, if Congress succeeds and everybody succeeds, we all succeed. We all do well.
Right.
And I think right now what's happened in politics is it's a blood sport.
Right.
So, you know, whoever wins this election in November and is president in January, it will be the job of the other party to destroy them if they can.
Yeah.
Again, that's just not the way democracies are supposed to work.
Right. And so I get to one of the points I want to make in this conversation too, is that I do believe that Trump is a very serious threat to democracy. I think it's important that he not serve again, that he not be allowed to serve again. I think Harris and Walz winning that election would, kind of like Biden winning 4 years ago, preserves and extends democracy for a time going forward. It does not end the threat that is happening to democracy. Those people that are trying to organize the system to block free and fair elections, that have those authoritarian tendencies, they are still there. And so the work it's already begun, but it has to continue to spread the idea of commitment to democracy and to win converts over to the idea of having a democratic society again. So I think that work has to happen. That will be much harder, and it will be a much longer slog if Trump wins. I think there could be some very disastrous things that happen. I don't think it's inevitable that that's the end of America, that we never recover from that. But some very awful, very terrible things, I think, could happen if an authoritarian like Trump gets into power and disrupts the American system. With Harris and Walz, I think you have a time in which to continue to build and to push back against those anti-democratic forces. So that's my hope for the future. Policy on things like tax credits or abortion, all these issues, all those can be changed in a future election as long as we have future elections. So you can't, and I think that again, come back to the thing that what keeps society functioning is knowing that even when I lose on policy things that I would like to see enacted, it's never finally decided. There's always the option in the future. And right now, that ability to have that option to change things in the future is vastly more important than any particular policy difference that I have with a candidate right now. Yeah.
Yeah. When someone says, if you vote for me now in 4 years, you won't have to vote again.
Exactly.
That ought to be concerning. And sure. And again, let's just be clear. It isn't the issue here, again, is authoritarianism.
Right.
Not left or right.
Right.
And that's
correct.
Let me stop left or right. Conservative liberal.
Right.
And that's the problem. And you and I, and we both agree that, and seriously true conservatives have also seen that this is the threat, that Trump is a threat, an authoritarian threat.
Right.
And by the way, the other thing is I've done a little bit of reading over the years in authoritarianism, simply because my interest in Latin America and my interest in Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I have yet to find an authoritarian in power who is not a narcissist.
Absolutely.
A clinical narcissist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And so it, so I do agree with you. I think I want to see democracy live to fight another day. And I'm going to vote for Harris by the way, let me say one thing.
Yeah.
The Republican Party
Yeah.
had a wonderful mainstream, serious conservative
Yeah.
candidate in Nikki Haley.
Yes, they did.
Really.
Yep. Yep.
They had, I mean, conservative creds, foreign policy creds.
A woman with minority background. Yeah.
I mean, could
Yeah.
you just imagine this election right now if it were Nikki Haley and Kamala Harris?
Yeah.
Think
Right.
about it for a moment.
Yeah.
But my point simply is the Republicans had a perfect opportunity
Right.
to put someone who seriously could win the election,
Right.
right? And before they knew Biden was dropping out,
Right.
would have buried Joe Biden, I
Yeah.
believe,
Very
in an
possibly.
election,
Yeah.
right?
Possibly.
And what
Yeah.
did they do?
Yeah.
They went with the, I mean, it just absolutely blows me away.
Yeah.
If Nikki Haley were on the ticket, I might be voting
Yeah.
for her, right? Because I'm a swing voter. I voted for Republicans and Democrats, right? I don't
Right.
have loyalty to either party. I might
Right.
vote. I might have voted for her. I'm not voting for Trump. And
Right.
again, it has nothing to do with him being he's not a conservative. So,
Right.
so there's just something, Michael. It seems to me that within the last decade, there are factions within the Republican Party that have a death wish.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are people that are grifters. There are people that are there for things that have nothing to do with governing, with policy, with anything to take the country forward. It's about increasing podcast views. It's about personal aggrandizement. And all of that, the political stage is just a platform for them to be able to advance that. It's really not, these are not serious people in terms of actually governing. And so I think that that's what you got. And because we live in a media culture, you have some very savvy media attuned people who know their audience and can play to that audience. And that's what Trump does. His whole shtick is a WWE villains versus the good guy, kind of thing. And, it just reeks of a WWE performance, a World Wrestling Entertainment performance. So that's what you got going. It really has nothing to do with the politics of it in some sense. So, yeah.
And I just think, I don't know, I think sometimes people get to the place where they would just rather go down with the ship.
Yes.
Because it's their ship.
Right.
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 Because if I'm a Republican strategist and I'm in a back room talking, I'm going to say, which of these candidates positions us to win the election?
Right.
That's my question.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt it's Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
And yet,
Yeah.
I can remember when Bill Clinton was nominated. I remember when he was first nominated.
Right.
And I can remember one reporters and pundits saying that the Democratic Party at that place where they were at that moment in 1992,
right.
that Democrats would have clearly preferred a more liberal candidate because Clinton was considered to be a centrist Democrat.
Right.
And how they really, really wanted somebody more liberal, but they knew that Clinton was electable.
Right. There you go. Right.
So the more liberal candidates they wanted, they just knew wouldn't be elected.
Right.
Right. I mean,
right.
In the wake of Michael Dukakis, if you remember, in 1988. So what you had there was a party at that point that wanted to win an election. So you had people who are on the more partisan liberal end who basically went with Clinton because they knew that was their best shot, even though that was not their preference.
Right.
Boy, I just wish the Republican Party was there today.
Yeah.
Like that.
And I can't help but wondering if in the American context with some of this Republican Party dynamic, there isn't sort of the Southern lost cause element flowing through the Republican Party. That this is it may be Pickett's charge, but by God, we went and we fought the enemy, and we died on the battlefield. And so this idea of glory and honor, dying for the cause, there seems to be an element of that with the whole Trump thing as well too. So I don't know. Yeah.
We lost the election, but we owned the libs, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, right.
And just by voting for it.
That's often how it feels. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we'll see, Mike.
Yeah.
We'll see. So are you hopeful? I mean, and not necessarily the election. I mean, one way or another. Are you hopeful for democracy?
I am hopeful for democracy, and
You are.
I think
Yeah.
the that's let me qualify that. I think I mentioned before, we talked about over the past 200 years this tremendous growth in life expectancy and human well-being and all the things that occurred through that. In the middle of that were two world wars. There was famine.
Yeah.
There were reversals. There were things that definitely were not good that happened in that 200-year process through which we've seen humanity moving. So when I say am I hopeful for democracy, yes, I'm hopeful for democracy. I think it prevails. That doesn't mean that there isn't some pretty ugly stuff that happens on the way to it prevailing.
Yeah.
So I think that's how
Yeah.
I qualify it. I'm encouraged to see the how do I say the energy around wanting to preserve democracy emerging in so many different corners. One of the things I think is interesting, I posted this yesterday or the day before. Guy did analysis of the new registrants to vote from July 21 of 2020 through July 21 of this year, which is before the Harris Biden thing switch. And there was an uptick of 178% in Black women registering to vote, 100% increase in Black women voting. I think it was 100% for Latinos, 100% for Blacks overall. For whites, it was uptick of like 7% or something like that. I can't remember what it was in terms of people registering to vote. You see that there are people who are concerned about, particularly in minority status, who are concerned about their rights, who want democracy to prevail. And so I think you are seeing that emerge, and people are becoming activated and addressing that. So you can just listen to one side of what's happening and you see all the crazy stuff Trump does and see what they're trying to do to subvert election processes in Georgia and other places. But don't lose sight of what's happening in response to that as well. And I think that that's where the momentum is. I think that's really what's going to happen. I don't know that that necessarily means that Trump doesn't win this election, but over the long term, yes, next generation, I think democracy prevails. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if Harris does win the election, I don't. I've said this. I don't believe Trump prevails in subverting it. I think that if Harris wins, once we know what the votes are, if Harris wins, it's going to be another interesting ride until Inauguration Day.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's not going to prevail. I think
no.
In spite of the people he's got there planted, our institutions are too strong.
Yeah.
And in a good way. And I just don't think he wins. And I also think on Inauguration Day, it's not going to be the same thing as it was the last one because Joe Biden's president.
Yeah.
And, he's going to make sure that if there's any concerns that they will be prepared.
Right.
So I do think democracy does prevail. I'm hopeful about that. But after I'm a peddler of hope. So,
That's right. You are.
It's got to be that way.
That's right.
Well, that's good, Michael. I appreciate your insight on this.
Well, thank you.
And,
it's good discussion. Yeah.
It was a good discussion. I enjoyed it. And next month, the end of September, we are going to talk about the Electoral College.
Yes.
Yay or nay? That's a subject that gets people animated, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not unimportant. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but I mean, man, if you want to start a discussion on social media, just post, keep the Electoral College or get rid of the Electoral College, and man, it's off to the races.
Right. It's either that or math operations. Either one of those will really get the debate going. So.
Oh, this is true. This is true. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Michael. Friends, thanks for joining us today. This is Faith Seeking Understanding. I'm Allan. A reminder that here at Faith Seeking Understanding, the patron saint here is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, "I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand." So, friends, keep seeking.